Hi, this is Alex Paknadel, and you are listening to a very special episode, because I'm on it, of Power of X-Men.
Familia, it is finally here. Cyclops issue 1 by Alex Paknadel. And we got Alex on the podcast here to discuss everything about that first issue. Familia, we get into it. We talk about Cyclops in X-Men 97. We talk about Cyclops' history, the throwbacks in this issue, dating back to 1989's X-Men Classic issues 41 and 42 at the Essex State House in Nebraska, where Cyclops sort of came of age under that very sinister eye of course, Mister Sinister. But we really have a fun time going through this issue, sort of discussing Cyclops, the kind of character he is, where he's at his core, what happens to Cyclops when you strip everything away from him and he's in a situation he can't control. Familia, we have been waiting for a Cyclops series for such a long time, and it's finally here, and it's so good. I'm going to encourage everyone, go out and buy this issue. Go to your local comic book store, wherever you buy digital comics. Get this first issue. It is so good. You know, the rumors of a Cyclops series have been out there for a couple of years. Even when we had Jed McKay on the podcast last year, we were like, Jed, come on. We know a Cyclops series is coming. Are you the one writing it? And it's finally here, and Alex nails it. This is a home run. Alex has such a wonderful understanding of Scott Summers as a character. The issue is so well paced, a lot of great action. We have the Reavers here, and I don't know how all of you at home feel. I read the Reavers at a specific time in my life, so I find them quite terrifying, and we unpack that a little bit more in this episode, and it makes the Reavers even more terrifying the way Alex sees them. A couple of housekeeping things here. I'm not going to be at New York Toy Fair this weekend. Sadly, I had something come up, and I'm not going to be able to make it. It's potentially big news. I don't know. We'll see where it goes. A lot of these big news things in life technically don't go anywhere, but we will be following along any news items that come out of it. I think I'm going to be able to swing MegaCon next month in Orlando. I'll just be back in New York/Hoboken, but I think I have that weekend free, and I think I can pop in. And of course, our co-host Michelle Waffle will be there. So hopefully you'll see us both on the con floor. Hit us up if you see us. Tell us how much you love X-Men. Most importantly, go message Alex Paknadel to tell him how much you love issue 1 of Cyclops. I am so proud of this episode of Power of X-Men. These are the kinds of discussions we like having here at Power of X-Men. So sit back, pull up that issue of Cyclops, and enjoy this conversation with Alex Paknadel. Alex, man, the way they handled Madeline Pryor in X-Men 97, I don't think many people know how poorly handled the Maddie Scott-Jean dynamic was in the comics. What were your thoughts on it?
It's a tricky one, because in terms of how it was handled in the comics, and I know this is going to sound really mealy-mouthed, but it evoked and it provoked an emotional response, right? The way it was handled in the comics, it provoked an emotional response. With that in mind, can we sort of do we sort of look at it askance the whole time, or do we sort of take it in the round and go, okay, well, this is something that's been, it's an additive thing. So plenty of writers have kind of had their hands on it, and I guess I'm just not as keen to sort of write it off as a sort of abject failure. You know what I mean? But a lot of that, again, and I think this is probably a theme that I'll come back to, is, I started reading so I started reading X-Men, adjectiveless X-Men, in '91. But when I first went back, the first thing I read was Inferno because I thought it looked dope.
Oh, it's perfect.
And so you know, you can say, and by the way, I mean, these are strains that I think I'm not going to single anyone out for this because I think it's a trope, and I think we kind of fall back on tropes not necessarily not because we should, but because they're kind of deeply culturally encoded. But there's an element with Madeline of like the mad woman in the attic trope,
Hmm.
the woman scorned and everything. But I think there have been so many kind of interesting. I mean, like what Fox did, I thought with like Dark X-Men was fantastic. You know, in terms of just sort of, it's not a it's not a rehabilitation because there's an acknowledgement there that there's like nothing to rehabilitate, right? But I think what happened with '97, which is interesting, is I think it's quite when you look at a comic run, which is largely it's a chain letter, right? It's a chain letter. It's an exquisite corpse. You know, it's a baton being passed from writer to writer to writer. And I think the writers of '97 had all of that continuity to draw from, and they could basically distill it into something that was perhaps not more coherent, but perhaps more cohesive, tighter, and more, I guess, something with a sort of a cleaner narrative arc. But they couldn't have done that without the comics. You know, everything there pretty much was in the comics. So I don't know. I feel like I have a lot of time for Madeline Pryor, but I have a lot of time for Madeline Pryor in the comics. You know what I mean?
I have to tell you, first off, the fact that you just described the comic book process from writer to writer as an exquisite corpse, I like my eyes are just lit up right now because I've never thought about it as an exquisite corpse. And for the folks at home who don't know, an exquisite corpse is sort of this literary technique you do where one writer starts a story and then the next writer takes the last line and starts a story from there. And you're absolutely right on that with the X-Men, and especially when you're looking at the history of writers to writers. But one of the things that I think, and we're talking about tropes here, was when Maddie was first created, and she was supposed to be that 1 in a million chance that Scott found someone who looked like Jean. And we talked about this with Chris Claremont. It's this very Hitchcockian idea that your dead lover has returned, but it's another person, right? And then it morphed into the evil clone syndrome, where it's like, that's not a real person. It's just like an angry clone that has sort of taken over Manhattan. And now those memories will be transferred to Jean, and Jean is one in the same. And I really do think when I look back on all of it, with the gift of continuity, understanding the entire continuity, it was all Mister Sinister pulling those fucking strings for those three, for Scott, Jean, and Maddie.
I mean, and I think that's the kind of. I mean, again, hindsight's 2020, but I also think, I mean, to your earlier point, I think hindsight can be, hopefully, I think with hindsight we can have a bit of grace, and it can be a bit more forgiving. And I mean, it's kind of it's fascinating to me, just kind of conceptually, that Sinister kind of constructed this stage set, this elaborate kind of production around Scott to convince him that he was having a real life the whole time. And which is, I mean, it's a really kind of disturbing concept that here is this kind of utterly sort of stage managed reality that Scott Summers inhabits, and the only way out of that is through kind of Xavier, but he keeps falling back into it, and it's this kind of tar pit. And as you say, for a hot minute, Maddie is a road out to the real, and she's not, and but her realization of that, I mean, and again, the relationship that she ends up sort of having with Alex, I mean, they're both kind of kicking out against that, right? Is on the one hand, Scott is having to sort of deal with the reality of the situation, which is that, the world that he knows is this sort of stage set where, every single moment, what he thought of as kind of immutable sort of artifacts of his childhood just end up being sort of folded up like a game and sort of, shoved under the bed. But then Madeline realizes that she's like an extra. And the rage of that, I think, I genuinely think the rage that she sort of evinces at that sort of realization was really deftly handled at times, really deftly handled at times. And I think, yeah, particularly by Claremont, particularly by Fox, I think particularly by Zeb Wells, right? Like, I think that's been really beautifully handled.
Oh, I couldn't agree with you more.
But as you say, like, I think with 97, they got to kind of, and by the way, that sort of the ability to kind of curate storylines is a sort of masterful in itself. But the fact that they kind of got to cherry pick, I think, they had a buffet to choose from. I would say a banquet, right?
I do agree with you, man. One of the things, just to butt in that statement you did, it's really hard to look at decades of continuity and tell a streamlined story. You really do need someone who can see the forest for the trees and something like that. Going back though to Scott and how you were talking about how Mister Sinister has created this elaborate stage for Cyclops to inhabit, and we're taking continuity as it is. From the Nebraska orphanage all the way through to Maddie, it's you really start feeling for Cyclops, and this is something that, for decades we've had to defend Cyclops because a lot of people see him as sort of like a stick up his ass kind of guy, or he left Madeline, he was so awful, and I always try to bring it back. It's like, hey, he was thrown out of a plane as his parents were abducted by the Shi'ar. Him and his brother were separated in the foster care system. He is alone at an orphanage where Mister Sinister is performing experiments on him, observing him, and he is a child. And then he witnesses the love of his life, his high school sweetheart, kill herself on the moon. And then Sinister sends a clone that looks exactly like Jean to him with the purposes of only mating. And it doesn't excuse any actions, but you do understand, as you said, the larger play that's happening here, and that Jean, Maddie, and Scott are all being pulled by Sinister, and it's horrific, and it's something that I'm glad issue 1 of Cyclops that came out today, which is phenomenal. I'm so glad you leaned into what happened in Nebraska, because that gets really overshadowed.
Well, I think part of that is because and again, we go back to the kind of the idea of the exquisite corpse. Accounts vary, right? But rather than viewing that as a liability, I thought, okay, well, what if I treat that as an asset? I can populate that ambiguity with my own reading. So, one of the ones that I kind of came back to was, I don't think it's been settled kind of how long Alex and Scott were kind of in the wilderness, after they fell out of the plane. Accounts vary, I think there's one where they're found pretty much immediately, and then there's another where it's like some time has elapsed. And it suited my purposes to think, or to sort of, and this is not in the book, but it's very much in my kind of head canon, that, Scott had to maybe do some dark stuff to help them survive, which is the sort of foundation of how protective he is of Alex, which is then sort of carried across to the orphanage. Alex ends up being taken away, but I almost kind of, and again, I couldn't find anything that contradicted that. So I sort of posited that, yeah, maybe when they were separated, that separation was very violent, and that Scott has this sort of feral side he's basically not ever allowed to express because, his mutant power kind of prohibits it, right? He cannot lose control because if he loses control, he will level a city. So this is someone who is almost, this is sort of getting into the weeds of it, but I almost kind of, I started sort of thinking of him through personal experience, candidly, but like I started thinking of him or sort of positioning him sort of rhetorically as almost like an alcoholic, someone who is basically has to be their own jailer. This is someone who has a sort of perpetual responsibility to keep this side of themselves locked up. And that is their kind of profound social responsibility is, there is something kind of wild inside me. And, the visor is almost a sort of physical embodiment of that sort of control. I mean, I sort of said this elsewhere, and I'd written down sort of various kind of observations that I had kind of going in. And one of them was, and again, my take is not intended to override anybody else's. What I think of as a sort of definitive Scott Summers statement, it doesn't contradict anyone else's at all. But one of the things I found useful for this story was to think of Cyclops as a nuclear reactor and his visor as a control rod. If you remove the visor, basically a meltdown begins, So he's lost his control mechanism.
Which is what we see in this issue when the visor comes out and his powers are out of control. I have a quick question about that. The effect that is rendered on that panel is very reminiscent of the Bendis era after AVX, where Cyclops couldn't control his powers. It's sort of like those circles around him. Was that intentional?
You would have to ask Roge. I mean, all I knew was, because I have I mean, particularly, don't get me wrong, I'm a Zark guy. I love Zark. But all I knew going in was that, and weirdly, I kind of got it from Oppenheimer, right?
Yeah.
You know how in the kind of Trinity test in Oppenheimer, it's completely silent.
Mm-hmm.
And so, we were having this conversation, and there's a big conversation about whether we should have SFX on that big splash page where you just see him just obliterating everything around him. And my immediate thought was, okay, well, subjectively, like it's blown out your eardrums.
Yeah.
Right. If you see him operating at that level with no visor, completely uncontained, completely uncontrolled, you would actually hear nothing. It's so loud you would hear nothing.
He is back to square one, essentially, right? Because that time he jumped out of the plane with Alex. He was lost in the woods. He had that head injury, and now he's exactly there. You've put him back at square one. The Quinjet explodes.
Almost intentionally.
One would assume. But, like, why would you want to bring Scott back to that moment? As a writer? As a writer, what delicious aspects do you think we can dive into Scott in this?
Well, I figure because that's kind of his sort of primordial scene, right? Mm-hmm. Like that's his kind of formative moment. And what I find interesting, I think, is that we've only ever really had glimpses of him before that moment.
Mm-hmm.
And again, this is something that I was kind of toying, again, just sort of headcanon that I found useful.
We love your headcanon. I'm sorry to interrupt you. Your headcanon, thank you, Alex, for having it, because there's certain gaps in the Summers family history, like exactly what you said about when were Alex and Scott separated. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I don't think we've ever seen a scene, and the family at home can slide into our DMs and let us know, but I don't think we've seen a scene where Alex and Scott were separated in the orphanage or foster care system. It's very nebulous, and thank you for filling in those gaps.
Well, again, I mean, I've only kind of done so glancingly because, don't get me wrong, I'd love to do a kind of year one approach where I kind of explored that fully, but this is not that story, so it's very much kind of context.
We want to advocate for that year one Cyclops. I'm just saying.
I appreciate. No, thank you. But I mean, I feel like there is room for it, right? I mean, Magneto Testament is one of my favorite sort of X stories ever.
Yeah.
I mean that kind of anyway. If you're listening, Tom, I'm available. But yeah, just for sort of in my head canon, I was thinking, well, hang on, like, what if prior to that accident, well, it's not an accident, is it? Prior to the incident, in the plane. The prevailing assumption, I think, is always that like Alex was always the sort of carefree, like recalcitrant one, right? Like Alex was going to be, but it struck me that so sort of definitional and foundational is that power set to Scott's personality. There's no reason why prior to that plane crash he wouldn't have been the little shit. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
That
no.
Scott would have been the really like naughty kid.
Yeah.
You know?
It took what did you say in the issue? Like two orderlies to bring him down three times.
Exactly.
He took down an
Exactly.
entire wing. Yeah, yeah, agreed.
Um,
Well, and
and
it's
it's
also trauma informs your behavior, and that is a very pivotal moment for Scott. And this goes back to what you were talking about with your approach to him as being an alcoholic, the idea that he has to be his own jailer. I mean, it's just so. I'm sorry, I'm fanboying out in front of you.
no, 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 no,
Sorry,
not
I'm
at all.
sorry. I
No,
just think it's
I'm
brilliant the
glad.
way you've taken our seeds that have been planted with the character all the way back through Grant Morrison's New X-Men, and you're flushing them out. Sorry.
No, no. I mean, I appreciate it. I mean, I would never lay claim to building on anything Morrison's established. At the best, I'm a footnote. But no, yeah. So I guess that sort of informed my approach. Right, was just sort of, and again, there's bound to be someone, anyone who kind of handles Scott. Jed may disagree. I mean, I did talk to Jed quite a lot, so I think we're broadly on the same page. But a lot of this is kind of
We love Jed.
it's informing the writing rather than it's implicit. You know what I mean? This is how I'm kind of approaching the character, but it's not something that I'm gonna put on the page.
And we were talking about this on DMs about that scene with Beast and Cyclops where they're talking about algebra, the algebra class
Yeah.
at Xavier's. And Scott's like, and I'm paraphrasing, Scott's like, we've always been soldiers. And Hank is like, I remember dancing and having a good time. And it struck me when I was reading this that Scott, and hearing you talk right now, that Scott was kind of a pessimist walking into the Xavier school, and he had to control himself, and he had to sort of put a certain side of himself apart, and he was probably more of a realist than the other kids, and that he didn't really get to have that childhood. And you had the brilliant line where Beast is like, I just remember dancing, and I don't think Cyclops knows how to dance.
Well, I think I mean, he saw some of that on Krakoa, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then it was kind of taken away again.
Mm.
So I always think, and I mean, not to kind of I won't give anything away, but certainly that's one of the kind of themes that I'm hoping to address, however kind of glancingly through the story, just sort of looking at the world around us, right? And everything that's happening. And I think I'll try and be as careful as I can how I phrase this because, I know that this is extremely delicate subject matter. But I guess one of the themes that I wanted to kind of address in the story is like, what do we fight for if not to dance? Right? I forget who said this, but someone said,
Alex.
but do you
That's
know what I mean?
perfect. No, yeah, I 100% agree with you. I'm trying to put my words here where it's like you have to fight for those moments of happiness. That's why we are putting our lives on the line because we believe that the world is capable of having dances. Of festivities, and that's what Krakoa was for Psych. I couldn't agree with you more. I'm sorry.
No, 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 not at
You
all.
have left me speechless, man. Like I got goosebumps.
No, no. I mean, yeah. I mean, look. I'm glad I'm not alone in that because you don't want to you don't want to sort of attempt a reading of a character that nobody kind of that doesn't sort of rhyme with anybody else's kind of view. And I suppose that's sort of that's sort of one of the themes that I'm going to sort of gently explore through the book is because Scott is perpetually in play either playing offense or playing defense, right? But there doesn't seem to be room for dancing, at least in this kind of formulation of the character. Um, and so a part of that is going to be sort of his journey, I guess, through that, right? Is because, like Hank's saying the most obvious thing to him in the world. And, this is, at least, in the mini, this is a Hank who kind of didn't experience a lot of the kind of worst stuff.
Yeah.
So his memory is kind of much, his memory is far fresher, if you like. And, in Scott's head, it's basically always been a war for survival. And so you almost have Hank as this kind of voice of reason in that first issue, just going, no, we danced, because what else, why else would we do this?
I really like that you said that about Hank because, intuitively, my reaction was, well, this Hank has a far more fresh memory of those days because he's not the world weary Hank that, would be the same mental age as Cyclops. And again, I think it's just a testament to the level of writing and the undertones that readers intuitively pick up. And that's something I always say about the X-Men franchise and why I think this first issue of Cyclops is so good when you have writers who write up to their readers. And that's certainly present here. And I have to tell you, I think a lot of us have struggled with what is the X-Men's place in a post-Krakoan world. And I think your approach to Cyclops makes the most sense, which is he's been a soldier at war his entire life. He's coming off of the heels of the Messiah Complex era, where they were on the brink of extinction. And then he died, obviously, during IVX, and he came back and X-Men disassembled. However, then Krakoa happened, and Jean was back to life. I mean, people forget Jean was dead for a very long time. He's with the love of his life on Krakoa. Whatever they're doing on the blue area of the moon with Wolverine, but it's they're in a period of extreme joy, and it's probably the first time in Cyclops' life that he's part of something that's pure joy, and then it's taken away.
Which is nothing if not a kind of vindication of, again, headcanon, what makes sense to me as a sort of foundational belief that you can't trust the good times.
Oh,
right.
Agree, Alex.
And, you can't trust utopia. You can't trust any consummation of history.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the burden that he shoulders every single day. Right. And also, absolutely every father figure in mutantdom has basically like anointed him as the savior of the species. So he has to live with that. It's a funny one, I mean, I said this elsewhere. He weirdly, he really reminds me, and this has been my way in. He really reminds me of my father. My father is one of those very kind of stoic guys who, has an absolutely like non-negotiable moral code, right? And he will not break it for anything. But also he is utterly inscrutable. You never know what he's thinking or feeling at any given moment, right? He just acts, and people come to him with their problems. And I remember the one time I saw him kind of nodding along. It wasn't like an extreme emotional reaction or anything. He got me into X-Men, by the way, so maybe there was a sort of early identification. I don't know. But I remember he had an emotional reaction to the Peter Weir film Fearless with Jeff Bridges. And it's about this guy who kind of survives a plane crash and has this sort of weird sort of sense of like invulnerability, but he's kind of perpetually kind of going around helping people. And then, like, not to put too fine a point, at the climax of the movie, and I kind of saw it getting to my dad, was where Jeff Bridges' character says, "But who's going to save me?" And so, one thing that I wanted to do with this Cyclops story is just sort of put him in a position where he has to ask the question, who's going to save me? He is, for the first time in a long time, in a situation that he cannot control. He doesn't have access to his optic blast. He doesn't have access to his visor. He is in the wilderness. He cannot see. The whole thing is a trust fall. All he has for company is a mutant teenager who doesn't like him particularly.
Has the mutant teenager been named? I'm forgetting off the top of my head.
Not in the issue, not diegetically, but her name is May.
May. Okay. What's up, May?
But not. And I keep having to clarify this. Not Maystorm, which is I think has bummed some people out, which sucks. But yeah.
Are we going to see sort of like a sidekick formation, just kind of like how Wolverine has his list of sidekicks? Is May going to be Cyclops' sidekick in the series?
Well, it's more okay. So I mean, I can give you kind of chapter and verse on this. I mean, the whole thing really, I was inspired by. I think it's Uncanny 245, but it's the Barry Windsor Smith Claremont issue, Wounded Wolf. And the whole series is inspired by that. It's Wolverine. I think his healing factors kind of crapped out, and he's basically defending this young girl from Reavers. It's why I chose the Reavers as the antagonists. The whole thing. I mean, I'm wearing the influence on the sleeve. It's an homage, right, to that story. I mean, I think it's one of the best X issues ever. And it's beautiful to look at because Barry Windsor Smith is extraordinary. But just again, that kind of it's that lone wolf and cub dynamic, right? It's the idea of the feral, the feral individual and the vulnerable. And I mean, in some respects, not to give too much away, I've kind of tried to sort of tinker with that a little bit and make it a little bit more nebulous. But that's very much it's going to be less a dynamic. It's Scott is going to have to depend on her to sort of be his eyes to an extent, and that's not a position that he's particularly comfortable with. But for reasons that will become abundantly clear, she also kind of needs him, but they really don't want to depend on each other. So I think it's sort of quite as much as it's a sort of complementary dynamic, it's also quite sort of antagonistic in places. It also kind of afforded me an opportunity because one of the things that I mean, this is again sort of getting into the weeds, but I remember when the first person I pitched it to was Matthew Rosenberg. I remember we love
Rosenberg here.
Eating burgers in Central Park, and I was writing Sentinels at the time, and I just said, "Oh, I've got this idea," and I ran it past him, and he said, "We'd like you have to pitch this." I said, "Well, I can't just cold pitch it." He said, "No, you can. This is the one time you can. If you don't do this, I will disown you." So I kind of pitched it there and then. But I remember sort of one of the things that he said to me, he said, "You're good. You're very good at narration. Don't use it." And we had a whole chat about it, and I saw the wisdom of what he was saying was, because this is, for all intents and purposes, what this story is it's a Wolverine story. It's a very kind of archetypal, very classic Wolverine story. But when you swap Logan out for Scott, you have all these interesting sort of dramatic potentials that you don't have. Don't get me wrong, I love Wolverine. But if you swap out effectively someone who needs to be in control all the time and you place them in an environment where they have zero control, Wolverine's very, very at home in that environment. Scott is absolutely not at home.
Yeah.
He cannot control the variables in any way, shape, or form. But one of the things that you would find is, if it was a Wolverine story, if it were, sorry, I'm having a grammar fail. If it were a Wolverine story, you would have internal narration, right? I'm the best there is at what I do, but what I do isn't very nice. So to differentiate it further from a Wolverine story, the suggestion was that, I said, okay, well, should I have, omniscience? Shall I go third person with it? And Matt just said, no, just have dialogue. And I thought about it and I thought, oh, and I didn't really know. I didn't, I tinkered with it a little bit but I thought about it and it intuitively made sense to me because here's the thing, right? The fact that, and I've said this elsewhere, but I think it bears repeating, the fact that Scott wears the visor or wears the glasses removes almost, particularly if you're an artist, right? It removes a good 70 to 80% of your weapons as a dramatist, right? So much acting is done through the eyes, right? We read people's facial expressions through the eyes. We read people's intentions through the eyes. And it's one of the reasons why, people sometimes, why are like the Na'vi in Avatar? Why are they so human? It's because you're with them for 3 hours, right? You wouldn't, it would be very difficult to empathize with them if they were truly alien. You need those points of identification. You need soulful, expressive eyes, right? Cyclops doesn't have that. You can have like cool, like I think I don't know if he invented it, but like Walt Simonson always used to do that thing where, if he was really pissed, you'd have like a coil of kind of red smoke, emanating from the visor or whatever. But in the main, his expression, apart from a wry smirk, is completely unreadable. But yes, that takes away a lot of your weapons as a dramatist, but it's also kind of a gift. The fact that you don't know what he's thinking, if you sort of reappraise that and view it in a new light, okay, that actually allows you to kind of keep a bit of a mystery going. It allows you to play with the character's intentions a little bit more. Is he as in control as he wants you to think he is? And so, but I thought the moment you give him internal narration, you throw that away.
Agreed.
But the problem is, if I'm placing him in a wilderness environment on his own, it's going to be a silent comic. So I had to give him not necessarily a sidekick, but almost kind of like a foil. Just, and by the way, don't get me wrong, I've done, I hope I've created a kind of fully fleshed out character, but in essence, I had to give him someone to talk to, really, like just on the sort of meat and potatoes level. Like I had to give him someone to talk to. Otherwise, it's going to be a really pretty silent comic, which will take you 2 minutes to read. Sorry, it's very long-winded. But
No. I love it. Listen, like I couldn't agree with you more. My wheels are spinning because let me pull on one thread really quickly, which are Cyclops' eyes, which is something that is always a subject when it comes to a romantic love interest. We saw this during the Dark Phoenix saga where Jean removes the visor and she can see his eyes. During Phoenix Endsong, Emma wanted to see his eyes, but she couldn't because in her diamond form she's post-human, and Cyclops feels like she's cold. Cyclops has so much going on in his head that the fact that he has all that power, everything, so much emotion, that visor is so symbolic. And in this issue, when he falls and the visor breaks, you see that expression in his eyes, so of sheer panic.
Sheer panic. I mean, he's also kind of violently concussed as well. I mean, that's part of it. But yeah, no, absolutely. I think there's just because again, there were so many different ways to play it, and I mean, candidly, there were several lettering passes because there was a lot of kind of back and forth about kind of precisely how much dialogue to have on the page.
Right there, look at that. I'll overlay it, but
Roche,
man,
just but just the horror of what's about to happen.
Mm-hmm.
is kind of palpable, I think, and the sort of the big splash on the next page where you're sort of viewing him from behind as well. I mean, again, mate, this is sort of a lot of undergraduate sort of sophistry, I guess, but like I was just thinking about it. Oh, without the visor, just everything he sees is gone.
Yeah.
There's a Lawrence Durrell line, I think, in the Alexandria Quartet where he says, "Vision is exorcism." And I think for Scott Summers, that is literally true. He looks at something and it's immediately gone. The tragedy of that.
Did the series kick off, like when you were conceptualizing the series? I know from past interviews you said you came to Brevoort and the editorial team with the pitch,
Mm.
and now you're telling me you were talking about it with Rosenberg having burgers. But what was that moment that you really wanted to tell a Cyclops story? Because a Cyclops solo has been rumored for a very long time, and we had Jed McKay on the podcast last year, and we loved Jed very much. But I hounded him. I was like, "You have a Cyclops solo coming, don't you?" And he was like, "No, I swear." Um, where was that moment that you thought you really did want to have a Cyclops story? Like,
I mean, I'd love to say I kind of had a eureka moment. I mean, I may have done, but I think it was just something I've been kind of tinkering with for a while. And I mean, really, my way in was because, the, my stories end up, they can get away from me sometimes, just being honest, right? They can be more elaborate than they should be.
like every writer.
Are more plotty than they should be. But I was trying to find something blindingly simple. And I think my way into it was just a Wolverine story with Cyclops.
Gotcha.
And then I was kind of off to the races. Um, but yeah, I mean, I couldn't tell you, if it kind of hit me, when I was on the toilet or in the laundromat or whatever. Um, all I know is, I mean, yeah, as far back as I think I might have even, it was on that walk that I think I kind of codified it. I mean, there were other versions that were kind of kicking around. I had a version of it where the Reavers had like stolen his eyes.
Oh
Um,
man.
yeah, and I remember I was talking to Darren Shan, my editor on the book about it. Um, because that was in the original kind of draft, and it was okay, and he just like absolutely no way, just absolutely no way. Go a different way. He's blindfolded, and that was the right call. I think that was the right call because then um, you take away his agency. He's he's wearing a blindfold in the series because he should, not because he has to. Right? It's the responsible thing to do. Sorry, please remind me of the question.
No, no, no.
I
It was
went
more
right
of
off the rails.
how about this? So when he falls and he has that injury in this issue,
Yeah,
the first person he calls out to is
yeah,
Jean.
yeah.
Does Jean respond? There seems to be some kind of time lapse. I'm curious about what you see Jean's role in Cyclops for Cyclops in the series. Can you unpack that moment for us?
I can, but yeah. So he falls. He sustains a blow to the head, which is effectively the kind of
It was
the na-
horrific. That I have to
yeah,
tell you, when I
but
was reading that issue, I thought you were going to do the X-Men 97 route where he was just going to be like, "I'll see you on the ground team." And you subversed that expectation brilliantly. I gasped. I said to this DM, I gasped when I saw that because the art, everything, so well done. How that
I
moment
appreciate. Yeah,
unfolded.
I mean, and it's a funny one because I know that kind of move has been seen in the comics and everything,
Hmm.
but there are there are moments where I feel like you kind of have to dabble in physics, right? And
Agree.
it's not to detract from a cool moment or anything. And I know that I'm going to upset some folks, but I remember whenever I saw something like that, I was kind of yeah, you'd snap your neck immediately, right? Like I can buy it that there's no is it the third law of motion? Because people could legitimately ask, every time he focuses his optic blast, I mean, really, that should sort of shatter his spine. So, you can't go too deep into the paint. But I don't know. I was just sort of thinking, yeah, one, and this will be my answer to everything, right? It didn't suit my purposes narratively for him to do that, right? But also, I mean, it's a really really cool move. But I tried to kind of put him in a position where he wouldn't be able to react quickly enough,
Hmm.
right? when you're falling, you fall quite quickly, right?
Yeah. No.
So he he's out of the Quinjet. Quinjet blows up. That's quite a moment. And then some sort of hot meteors basically just shred the parachute, and his horizon just sort of disappears. So, I mean, and I think that's a legitimate thing.
Agreed.
He could focus his optic blast on the ground, but where's the ground?
Yeah, he doesn't have that focus. I love that scene. I have to tell you, I thought it was so well done, and it was so like the art. My God! Again, I can't say enough great things about the art. But
I keep saying, sorry to cut across, but whatever, look. So far, the reception to the first issue has been deeply gratifying. But I also, I know that I have to earn readers' trust every issue. I may or may not do that. One thing of which I am certain is that Roge Antonio will be many, many people's go-to X-artist after this. Whatever they think of my work, I think Roge is going to emerge from this a superstar.
You both have such great writer-artist chemistry. It just feels like you all are in sync. But Jean, we are massive Jean Grey fans here.
Sure.
When he calls out to her, unpack that for us.
Sorry. I mean, is this the Phoenix thing? Is this the rapport thing?
Yeah, the Phoenix rapport. Is he just calling out to Jean? I kind of took it. Let me tell you how I read it. And you tell me if I had the right reading. He hit his head and he intuitively just thinks of Jean and calls out to her and nothing more. And I think Jean, I don't know Jean's current whereabouts, recently, and we're not asking for spoilers, but Jean is so far away, she probably didn't respond, and his natural intuition is to call for Jean.
I mean, you're right. I don't think he's calling for her necessarily. I think he's just so disoriented that he thinks he's somewhere else. So It's not necessarily kind of a cry for help.
Gotcha.
But as to the kind of the rapport of it all, candidly, dramatically, how can I put this? I already know that people will that there there's a whole kind of caucus of readership who will disapprove of this intensely, and I get it, but it would be a very, very short series if he just called for Jean and then a cosmic god shows up and just saves him.
We call her God Queen on this podcast. The God Queen shows up. No,
yeah, 100%. It would be a really so. And one of the things that I sort of said to the X office going in was, and again, this is not a presumption on my part. I don't assume that it's going to belong on the shelf with like Weapon X or Magneto Testament or Havoc and Wolverine Meltdown or any of those other classics. But my absolute sort of blue sky ambition with this, the thing that I'm aiming for, is I want this to be a perennial. I want it to be an evergreen. That's the opposite of that's an opposite of a perennial. But let's just pretend I didn't say that. I wanted it to be an evergreen. So. Yeah. I want this to be, in an ideal world, again, something that someone could pick up off the shelf in 10 years, read it, and have it make sense, right? That's not to say that I'm ignoring current X continuity. I'm not, but I am definitely treating a lot of it, or keeping a lot of it at kind of arm's length, because I wanted it to be I think I sort of described it as, I said in an early email, I want it to be a complete meal to the best of my ability. So, I mean, I know, there are people who want it in this series. I mean, someone said to me earlier today, I really, really enjoyed it, but I was really hoping that you were going to kind of pull on the kind of Doug thread. Well, yeah, absolutely. And they're not wrong. Nobody's wrong. It's just, I didn't want to be wedded to. I didn't want to be so locked into continuity that it didn't feel like it was its own thing. Right?
No, that makes perfect sense. You want it to stand on its own, an evergreen title. Yeah, 100%.
So, and the as cool as it is, and I know that I mean, Steph sort of set that stuff up really, really carefully. and really sensitively, I thought. But I just, like I said, it will be a very, very short series if she just descended from the clouds and just went, it's cool, I'll hold your optic blast at bay, let's all go home. So it's
Agreed.
not that facility doesn't exist in this story, but my take on it, and there are two takes, I guess. One is, if you want to be real dumb about it, he's had a blow to the head, oh, the psychic link is severed. That's the dumb version. The slightly more elevated version, which I can buy because I think on a character level it makes sense, is like, he's not going to call on her to fix his problems, man.
Yeah.
That's
Agreed.
not who he is.
Agreed.
Viscerally on a character level, he's just not going to pull that cord. Please come down from space and save me. He's not going to do that. So I think it kind of, there's a very kind of banal, like, mechanical reason why that wouldn't necessarily happen, but I think the one for me, the one that I prefer, is like on a character level, he is almost fanatically committed to sort of basically solving his own problems.
I love that characterization. And again, this goes to the quality of writing and the writer that you are, which is, you're absolutely right. Cyclops in this situation will not call for Jean. This is not a dire, the mutant species is hanging in the balance end of the world. This is him falling in a jungle and he's going to solve his own problem. We did solicit fan listener questions for you. And one of the big questions that came up, and this is kind of piggybacking on the Jean, were cameos. People are just like, who is coming? Who's going to show up? And obviously in this issue, we have Dr. Hanover, we have Alex. Are there any characters from Cyclops' history that we can expect to show up in the next few issues? It's a mini, right? I'm sorry, I should have fact checked.
5-issue mini.
It's a 5-issue mini. So in the next 4 issues, is there anyone that we can expect? You don't have to tell us who.
No. Glancingly, yes.
Mm-hmm.
But this is absolutely true. I mean, there were more, and the expression kind of "kill your darlings," right?
Yes.
So I did have, before the kid was in play,
Mm-hmm.
I kind of wanted it to be. I don't even know if I should say this because, like, people might turn around and go, "Oh, that sounds way better." But anyway, it didn't shake out that way. But I almost wanted him to have a kind of, to be sort of severely concussed, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so he's basically kind of maneuvering through this kind of forest with Alex as a kid.
Oh, that's haunting.
No.
It's haunting. No, I love the current situation, but that's haunting. I'm a big brother. And I have a very complicated relationship with my little brother, and I'm more in the moment thinking like you're disoriented and you replay memories in your head. I listen, this first issue, as far as I'm concerned, is perfect. And I think it's shaken out.
Like genuinely, like I loved it,
mm-hmm.
and I just couldn't make it fit with what I wanted to do. But like, don't get me wrong, like I still feel its absence, and I still think I have whole scenes that I wrote. You know what I mean? I have whole scenes that I wrote. I think what we have is great. I think what we have is better, but there's some stuff sort of on the cutting room floor.
Of course, that's with every issue. Rosenberg, we talked to Rosenberg about Phoenix Resurrection, and he had a slew of ideas that ended up on the cutting room floor, and it services a larger story. So it's a piece of the larger narrative. And again, I think putting the way you've sort of articulated that Cyclops is now in a situation that he can't control. The Reavers, who, by the way, I find the Reavers, and this is something personal to me, I find them so incredibly terrifying. And it's probably just the age I came to them, these cyborgs. I find it in my bones, Alex, do I feel it, that he is so vulnerable in this forest, and Pierce and these new Reavers, Tearjerker, are all after May and him. For me, this is a terrifying situation.
I've always found the Reavers. I mean, again, it's where you kind of join the property, isn't it? Right.
Mm-hmm.
I always found them scary. Um, I always found Pierce more scary than the the Mercs, right? I always found him more scary than the Mercs because Pierce was a true fanatic,
Yeah.
and I think I do dig into this to an extent in the book, but just this idea, this sort of central paradox, and I think, and again, not to put too fine a point on it, I think we can see this in the world around us, sadly, but just this idea that here are these people who are so who they're zealots. He's selected these new reavers because they are zealots. I think there's even a kind of throwaway line in there about I think one of them burned down a Krakoan gateway or something.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and so they are fanatics, but these are people who prize humanity so greatly that the first thing they do is surrender it.
Yeah. Oh,
Right? They're
man.
they're so
Alex, you're
committed.
so
They're so
right.
committed to humanity that they throw it away at the first available opportunity.
Alex,
Um,
I got fucking chills, man, when you said that. No. I mean, it's very true. I mean, and it's in that lines. You're like, I believe. I'm sorry, I'm paraphrasing your words here, but Pierce is like, you said you would do anything. Well, how about now? Do you still feel it? And Pierce is mocking them, being like, I know what your name is going to be now. Let's say tearjerker, because the pain is so great as they transition into Reavers.
well, that was the I mean, that was something. I mean, again, I'm sure your viewers slash listeners can will can cite numerous examples that sort of contradict this, but I certainly can't remember. I mean, I remember the fantastic, the sort of the sort of the body shop issue of Uncanny with Lady Deathstrike, where we see that transformation with her, but I don't remember seeing it with the Reavers. But I just remember, because it's the sort of process of making Reavers. I think was it recently was sort of like a nanotech take, and I just wanted to show. I mean, if you really sort of pour over the pages that Rose drew, like there's like a bunch of flies in the operating table, and he's just kind of putting their precious human limbs, and they're just being thrown on the floor, and there's blood everywhere and drills and stuff, and because he doesn't care about them, they are fodder, and he's just making them because they're a means to an end, in the way that various people who shall go unnamed tend to instrumentalize young people, right?
Mm-hmm.
um yeah, so they do terrify me, but less because of their capabilities and more because of what they are, right? I mean, these are people who, particularly the more in the image of Pierce they are, right? They are, again, and again, I can't kind of properly kind of conceptualize it, but just that they're just a walking paradox. They're so passionately committed to kind of humanity that they just threw it away the moment someone gave them an opportunity, because the only way they can compete with mutants is by sacrificing their own humanity. So what's the point?
100%. I think that's what makes them especially horrifying in this series.
But
And
every fanatic does that, right? Like, I mean, that's
every
the
fanatic,
point,
man.
right? Like,
Yeah.
it's someone said, I mean, again, sorry to make it really dark, but
Make it
um,
dark, man.
whenever the thing that always gets missed when you dehumanize other people
Hmm.
is that you also dehumanize yourself, right? When you dehumanize the other, you dehumanize yourself. It's when you treat other people like animals, you are the beast, right?
Yeah.
And that gets missed, sadly.
Cyclops, on the subject of Cyclops, so and humanity, one of the things that I found that was incredibly brilliant during the 12 search for Cyclops and New X-Men was that Cyclops was becoming a bit more human during those massive arcs.
Hmm.
Because at that point he had sort of been that stoic Boy Scout who, like you said perfectly, couldn't read, and then all of a sudden he gets a glimpse of the world from someone else's perspective. In this case, it was in Salvanor, aka Apocalypse, and Cyclops starts becoming in touch with himself, and that's why he gravitates towards Emma during New X-Men. So pulling it to Emma, though, what are your feels on a Scott and Emma relationship versus a Jean and Scott relationship?
I'm
And I'm
gonna
sorry
be
to
I'm gonna
ask you these very heavy-hitting journalistic
not at all.
questions here
No,
on
no, no.
Power of X-Men.
Dude, if this makes sense, right? Like I'm a huge fan. I've been a huge fan since God, man. Like I mean, my dad taught me to read with Marvel Treasury editions, and I first read X-Men when I got like I think I was super sick. I was 10, and my dad brought me in a stack of Claremont Cochrane, Claremont Byrne, that run.
Yeah.
I read that in hospital, and when I came out of hospital, it was like October 1991, and I was just there for X-Men 1. Like the blue and gold was my
Same.
formative era. That was my one.
Same.
And my dad hated it, which was great because then it was mine. You know what I mean? Everything just snapped into place. But I didn't, but I'm not, I missed a lot of the fandom is very, very passionate, and I'd missed just how kind of divisive sort of some of these issues were. Like I didn't realize. I mean, again, I didn't realize that the Emma relationship versus the Jean relationship was contentious in any way. I'll be honest, like I'm pretty agnostic, right? Like this is the most mealy mouthed answer I can offer.
No, it's a great
Um,
answer.
Instinctively, I say Jean, but the reason I say Jean, and I think this is going to be true for a lot of people, right? Like I'm pretty, I'm not a young man, right? So the relationship with Jean wasn't my formative exposure to Cyclops, right? When I was a kid, it was always Scott and Jean. So just intuitively, it just makes more sense to me, right? And by the way, like I wasn't reading comics, I imagine this. So I went straight from Claremont Byrne to Lee, right? I then went back and kind of collected everything, right? The sort of Claremont Silvestri stuff, the Paul Smith stuff. I had to go back and discover all that because my dad had stopped collecting at that point. He stopped, I think, in July '81. I think he stopped collecting, so I missed all that stuff. So I wasn't, Madeline was like news to me. Maddie was news to me. So it was always just Jean, right? And I got like I went to college, and then New X-Men happened, and then the kind of the Morrison run with Emma and everything. And I just remember finding all of that stuff. Let me put it this way, and this really helped me, by the way. A very, very prominent X writer told me once, someone who's has a long and storied kind of career with X, just said the way into this is to view it as, and didn't mean this, by the way, in like as a pejoratively in any way. This was not meant negatively, but just as the way in is to think of it as a soap opera, right? It's a very, very elevated, extremely smart soap opera, but all of those dynamics that you can play with, right? And with the Scott Emma thing, that's a soap opera beat, right? That's a soap opera beat. And on that kind of dramatic level, whether it's a soap opera or like a telenovela, like that's what I mean by it's unsurprising. Like, of course that's going to happen. It's a soap opera, right? Doesn't mean you condone those behaviors, but they're dramatic, and that's all they have to be,
You need dramatic
right?
beats in the story.
They have to provoke an emotional response, and in that respect, it succeeded kind of amply. As to who he belongs with. I think that's what I mean when I say kind of I'm agnostic, right?
Mm.
Because I honestly like I've these characters have just been with me for most of my life. I know it's the most mealy mouthed answer I could give, but I really mean it. I just love all of it. You
Same.
know,
Same.
it was that some of those Emma stories. The dynamic between he's so kind of inexperienced and she's absolutely, you know what I mean? Like he's so inexperienced and it's so kind of the dynamic between them is so different from the dynamic that he has with Jean and the dramatic potential there. But then I never doubted for 1 second that he'd end up back with Jean because that's what that's how it works. But I don't know. I really liked both. I like both.
Agreed.
I don't know what else to say.
You,
Sorry.
no, no. Why don't stop apologizing? Everything you have said. It's just like as a reader and as a fan of X-Men, I feel so seen, so incredibly seen. And with the Scott, Jean, Emma dynamic, I'm with you. I never thought of it as contentious until I started doing Power of X-Men, because for me it's so obvious that at the end of New X-Men, Scott had kind of chosen Jean, but since Jean was air quote dead, he couldn't move on with his grief, and the whole world went to hell. So Jean has to reset the timeline and push Scott to be with Emma. So Jean's given the blessing on this union, and for me, it's just what I love the most about the X-Men are not only those soap opera beats, but those high literary concepts and this understanding of character psychology, of Jean being like, listen, the world needs to continue. And because Jean is a character built on sacrifice, she will sacrifice her relationship with Scott to make sure the world is saved. And similarly, Cyclops and Emma together, I think you can see why they needed each other during this era.
Sacrifice, my God. Fire.
Fire, right there.
Of course.
Can I ask a very
Wow. Yeah.
deep
Sorry, you blew my mind, but
No,
there you go.
not
No,
at all.
you're absolutely.
Your dad introduced you to the X-Men, and now you're writing one of the flagship X characters. Is your dad still with us? Have you spoken to your dad about it? What sort of the reaction there?
Yeah, he's with us. He may see this, so I don't know. But I think I don't ever get any feedback, but he buys everything I do.
My
You know what I
dad is
mean?
the same way, and my dad will listen to this. So
Yeah. And I think that's my answer. You know what I mean? Dad, if you're listening to this, I'm really sorry. But I think this is how, like, comics is kind of how we communicated, right? Because I'm very kind of ethereal. I was always very kind of ethereal and very kind of arty and not very organized, right? And he's immensely practical and immensely pragmatic and hugely clever. And but we always had. I can narrow it down even further. Like we always had Marvel, right? And that was the Esperanto, that was the lingua franca of our relationship. Was like if we had nothing else to talk about, we'd talk about this, and that's probably why I love it as much as I do.
Alex, where can readers and listeners hit you up?
Slide into my DMs. No, please. Um,
That's how I got to talk to you. I slid into your DMs.
oh yeah, that's true. Yes. Okay, so
Terrorizing you for the last week. I'm sorry.
far from it. Far from it. It's a delight, and thank you so much for having me on. No, so yeah, I'm on the usual ones. I'm on Instagram. I'm on Blue Sky. I'm on Blue Sky quite a bit. Um, I do. I don't know for how much longer. I do haunt Twitter a little bit, but I feel a bit weird about it for obvious reasons. I'm also on Facebook, but I feel a bit weird about it for obvious reasons. But yeah, mainly, I mean, yeah, Instagram, Blue Sky, and yeah, like Twitter if you absolutely have to. But yeah, that's usually where I can be found.